So I just heard a fellow today, a Gad Sad, G Gadsaad, was really interesting guy. But he was talking about a thing that I'd never heard before. And I think he was talking about this in relation to Muslims coming to Western countries. And he said that if you don't agree with Western values, define those how you will, but if you don't agree with Western values, then you shouldn't come. You know what I mean? Like, we don't want you coming into the Western world with all of its marvelous values without those values, and then betraying those values or overthrowing them or whatever those things is. And I thought, well, that's interesting for me because I'm born and raised. Yes, born and raised Western. I am, and I can't really think of one honest Western value that I have much time for. Certainly not that I would say is distinctly Western. But the brag of Western values, which is bragged about a lot, are not. I'm not impressed. Never have been. And so But so should I leave? I have passports. I'm born and raised here. Should I leave? And that may be an answer to a huge number of my issues with the West. Here's one of them. The list of liberal democracies, in quotes, is quite long. Are they tolerant of others more than the totalitarianisms? I think so, but I'm not sure whether they are intentionally. Are they liberal? Are they democracies? Are people freer in them than, say, Iran or Russia? Yes, as far as I know, sure. But I know some Iranians, and if you are devout or self-disciplined in that devout way, you are free. And I find that also to be a reality in the West. If you have a certain devoutness and a certain, this is my issue with whether or not I should leave. I'd not feel free in Iran or Russia. My freedom is mostly to do with being unencumbered by praying to a God I don't believe in, paying taxes that go to weapons that perpetuate wars, and being stigmatized or hit on the head for expressing these thoughts or protesting. It's not a thing I do publicly. I don't respond to rally cries, but I do sometimes wish I did. Liberal democracies, such as they are now dotting the planet, and the self-anointed originals look on with glee until they select social democracies, then look out, which is understandable. Social democracies tend statist, high taxist, socially unselfish. So the possibility of a conservative, Republican, or Tory regime cancels the best laid plans. So I'm saying is that if you live in where I live, there really is no other option. You have to buy into that culture with those values. So how democratic is that? Unless you all agree on those values, in which case you have a sort of rather tepid democracy, the kind the founders fantasized. The British and Americans have solved this quite honestly by having one party with two wings, representing one constituency and abandoning all the others. This was not a problem as founded. Their intention was obvious and thought good by some then and since. One constituency was represented, the one that participated. As long as wealth keeps flowing, the rest of the world stays third. This state of affairs will continue. The problem, should we choose to own it like the nose on our faces, is that these famous democracies are really only functional for some of these few people, and fewer as time goes on. As in the famous or infamous Scandinavian countries, it is fun to watch. So the liberal democracies will either be conservative or liberal. The US and Britain are decidedly conservative culturally, and given that agreement, democracies within that context. Without that agreement, they are not democracies. Trump's America is not consistent with Biden's in very vital ways. So should Trump win in November, the fear of his and his followers' vision of America will prevail. Still, the same constituency will be heard and served by either Trump or Biden, as is the case today. This was sometimes a paradox, but now the time gives it proof, says Hamlet. The unheard are voting, not participating in a democracy, giving the rulers the thumbs up from the trenches, and then the rulers go on and make all the decisions, the rulers being the wealthy and the powerful. For instance, however is it constitutional to allow somebody who's accumulated a very large amount of money to buy the Washington Post or to buy Twitter? I subscribe to neither, but apparently they're very significant. How can you be talking about a democracy and allow that to happen? This is no different than monarchy. This is the state ideal to the Republicans in the old res publica sense, for the people, not of and by, but for, paternalist, Christian, and white. A state must have stasis, and these principles are the backbones of ours. Internationally, my larger observation is that the G8 and agreed upon liberal democracies are all ex-colonies or the powers that colonized them. The Western Hemisphere, apart from Japan, forgive me, but there are other issues with Japan. The Western Hemisphere, Europe, and the Australasia, do I trust them? This lot? No. I'll never be able to forget their forked tongues, their exploitation begot wealth, and their need to avoid these obvious and capital charges of crimes outstanding. Their pretensions to leadership cannot be trusted. The campus protests are old as the 60s and older, and say to me, to my country, I say, stop arming warmongers around the world. It is not really supporting. What good realistic accommodations might Israel and Ukraine have come to with Russia and Palestine if they weren't negotiating while backed by the greatest military backer in history? How might Mexico negotiate with the US were they armed to the teeth by China? If I was camping in Colombia's Quad, I'd have no thought or word for Israel. I'd be protesting America's state actions. Nothing to do with Israel. Except, they're getting the aid. Of course, the G8s will say Russia had no grounds for invasion and Israel has all the grounds imaginable. But I think they say this because these facts are in their favor. Hence, they insist Israel and Ukraine are defending themselves against unjustified evildoers. The G8s will align this way because it is their story. That's my problem. I believe Israel is justified. Their righteous massacres against their occupied occupations are justified. This is how they do business and insist history be written. And upon this legacy stand the liberal democracies, the conservative liberal democracies, watching like hawks the Central and South American democracies to be sure they don't go democratic socialist or social democrat. Real participatory stuff, not republics run by elites. India stands alone as an ex-colony that was part of the old world, colonized, and is a democracy. Its theocracies clash murderously over the voting reality, a good memory and witness of the malice and displeasure which we should bear it. Calling Biden socialist is code for Satan. That's why they do it. And it's not true. I wish he were. Ciao.